Hello and welcome back to the AFL High Performance Podcast. My name is Jack McLean. I'm your host, and today I'm lucky enough to have Alex Corvo on as our guest. Our key topic for today's chat will be discussing the behind the scenes of how a rugby league has evolved from a physical performance point of view and everything you need to know coming from the gym as well as field training. If you have questions and you're tuning in, feel free to hit us up on the comment section below, and no doubt we'll find some time for some questions a little bit later on. But welcome, Alex. Thanks for jumping on, mate. Really looking forward to our chat.
Hi, Jack. Thanks for having me.
No doubt, certainly those that have worked in rugby league, mate. Like we talked off air, you've got an extensive background, probably one of the largest ones out there. We'll be well aware of your background, but for those tuning in that aren't aware, mate, how did it all start? Where did your passion sort of begin with high performance strength and conditioning, and talk to us about the different experience you've had along your journey so far?
I suppose my passion really started when I was a teenager back in high school, and when I was working out what I wanted to do as a career, I sort of thought that strength conditioning was probably the area that I wanted to work in. So back when I was at school, most of the strength conditioning coaches, or in fact, most clubs didn't even have a strength conditioning coach. It was all fairly new. And most of them were school teachers. So I ended up doing a teaching degree in phys ed. And from there, I taught for about 3 or 4 years. But rugby league was my passion. And my first role in rugby league was with the Queensland Rugby League, working in coaching and development. So I was a development officer. I moved up to Brisbane from Canberra to take on that role. And I worked for about 3 or 4 years in coaching and development at the QRL. So I had a coaching background initially. And then I left there and I went into the police service as a PTI for 2 years. And that allowed me to coach on the side. So I had a assistant coaching role at Brisbane West initially, and then I was offered the head coaching role at Redcliffe back in 1999. And coaching really wasn't what my passion was. Strength conditioning was my real passion. So I took the coaching roles on and enjoyed it. But after a couple of years, I got offered a role down at Canberra at the Raiders with Mal Meninga. So I took on coaching role, strength conditioning role down at the Raiders from 2000 on 2001. I had 2 years there. And from there, Mal had his coaching job relinquished. So Matty Elliott took over and he had his own performance unit in mind. So I was out of a job at the Raiders, which sort of hurt me because Canberra was my club, my home team. And when I got the role there at Canberra, I thought that I was going to be there for a long time, but I was only there for 2 years and left the Raiders. And I went and took an opportunity overseas in England for a year, worked in the English Super League, and that was an experience in itself. The team got relegated, so we didn't have a great season. I was working with Salford Reds, and we had to change a coach mid-year, and so it was a bit turbulent. But
Challenging first few years as S&C.
Yeah, while I was over there, I got a phone call from Craig Bellamy, and he'd just been appointed at Melbourne, and he asked if I was interested in going to the Storm as a strength conditioning coach. So obviously, I jumped at that chance, and I had 11 years down at Melbourne. Started in 2003 and finished up in 2013. And then I was offered a role at the Brisbane Broncos as the head of performance. So I left Melbourne to go to Brisbane, and Anthony Griffin was the coach. And he got sacked halfway through as well, and Wayne Bennett took over. So I worked together with Wayne till 2017. And then I got offered a role at the Warriors in New Zealand. So I went over to the Auckland Warriors for 2 years, and then came back to Brisbane, worked at the Broncos. And my last NRL role was at the Broncos when I finished there in 2023. was my last year at the Broncos.
And did you do a bit of time at Origin as well, Queensland?
Yeah, I had 5 years at the Origin level.
Fantastic.
So that
While
was
being at a club as well, while you're
yeah,
working at Broncos.
yeah. While I was at Broncos and New Zealand Warriors, and also the Broncos, I worked at Origin level, and before that, I had 7 years with the Kangaroos as well. So that was pretty good experience working with Tim Sheens.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Like I said at the start, extensive career in rugby league that and now you're consulting performance teams as well. So I guess giving back to those experiences that you've had over
yeah.
the years and probably still haven't. But how have you found that transition from clubland to international duties to now consulting practitioners?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting when you're working with representative teams. Your philosophy changes a little bit, and that you've got to work together with your players probably even more closely, and you don't try to change too much in terms of what they're doing at clubland. It's a matter of keeping them happy and healthy, and not breaking them, I suppose. So that's your main priority, I think, as a representative person, is just to help facilitate what they normally do at their clubs and to make sure that they turn up on game day ready to play. Whereas at clubland, you can have a lot more influence with your players because you've got them for longer periods of time, and they're full time working with you.
And looking back over your career so far, mate, what are some highlights, some moments that sort of spring front of mind that you're most proud of?
Um, everyone thinks winning premierships or winning Origin series and World Cups in rugby league is the be all and end all, and I suppose it is. But the thing that gives me most pleasure is seeing the success, the long term success that a lot of the players that I work with, have had in long, extensive, successful careers. When I went to Melbourne, Cameron Smith played one first grade game. He's gone on to play, 400 odd games. Same as, dropping names, but Billy Slater and Cooper Cronk, Jesse Bromwich, these guys have all played in excess of 300 NRL games, and that just gives me a lot of pleasure to think that I might have had some input into them having their successful careers that they've gone on and had. Of course, winning grand finals is the ultimate in rugby league. So I was fortunate enough to have a bit of success there back in the Melbourne Storm days. Lost a few grand finals as well, which is never nice, but I suppose you've got to lose one to win. And then with international stuff, winning Four Nations series and a Rugby League World Cup was quite fulfilling. And of course, winning an Origin series is the ultimate in representative football as well. So being involved in those situations has been very enjoyable.
Do the rooms compare after a game with those three different environments? Yeah, winning an Origin series, World Cup, and club premiership. Like, what's the is the different levels of euphoria, or they're all pretty similar? Everyone's the same amount of sort of joy and excitement and happiness after each of those.
I think most people would say that winning grand finals is the ultimate because you've worked so hard for so long. It's a full year commitment. But then again, that's not to downplay winning Origin series and knowing what it means to the Queensland people, I suppose. And also winning, representative World Cups and Four Nations with the national team is also quite an experience. But I think nothing beats grand finals and premierships.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you tend to have to lose one before you win one. What would be some of your more significant challenges, certainly leading programs, no doubt. There's pressure every day to push the boundaries. But yeah, what have been the biggest challenges you found over the years, and what did you sort of learn, or how did you grow from facing those challenges?
Yeah, I suppose the biggest challenge is just coordinating your work with the coaches and the head coach in particular, and linking into what his philosophies are and his thoughts on how the team wants to play, and then tailoring your training to meet those philosophies. Um, you know, obviously when you're losing, it's always a bit of a challenge. You ask yourself questions as to what you can do better. Are we working too hard? Are we not working hard enough? Are we fit enough? Are we strong enough in the gym? So you have all those doubts and questions coming in. And I think it's important that you probably don't get too caught up in the win-loss mentality, because you ride a bit of a roller coaster if you do that. So you've got to sort of stick to your philosophies, win, lose or draw, and quickly move on from a win or a loss, because the next week can be the exact opposite in emotions. So you've got to sort of ride the highs and the lows out and be consistent in what you do.
Yeah, on that one, it's a good segue for our topic. What would be your own sort of process in that reset period of, I guess, enjoying the win with the players and staff, but then switching gears into the process for the upcoming week? How quickly would you tend to do that? Is that on the day of game day, once you're sort of on the bus or on the plane, or is that the next morning when you wake up? But would you tend to shift that
Yeah,
mindset?
it's probably the next morning when you turn up for recovery, and you look forward to the next week. And the psychology, I suppose, of a win or a loss is pretty important. Players can get pretty comfortable pretty quickly if they've had a bit of success. So I suppose, and coming from the head coach, and I know that Craig was very strong on the idea of recognising any complacency or comfortableness, um, and getting onto it straight away in terms of the next performance.
What do you think's harder to manage? A team that's got a bit of a roll on, but noticing you're winning, but perhaps there's some complacency creeping in, or a team that's struggling to get the wins and they're trying their hardest, and they're on a bit of an edge and they're doing everything they possibly can, but they're just not quite getting the results. But what's a harder group to manage, or are they just different?
Yeah, they're different. I think winning weeks are good weeks, so you never ever begrudge the winning formula. But I think when you're in a team that's struggling to win, as they've had successive losses, that's when it can be pretty difficult and pretty challenging. Trying to keep upbeat, keep the morale high. And obviously as a group of staff, it's important that we, produce an environment which is not, as I said, so reactive to wins and losses, but to keep it consistent, keep it a healthy winning environment, even if you're not winning. So I think
That's a
that's
good
the
one.
biggest challenge. Yeah.
And you mentioned, proud moments of playing a part with Billy Slater and Cooper Cronk, Cameron Smith, who played well over 300 games each, and obviously Canberra 400. But for athletes listening in, what did you sort of learn from those athletes in terms of early days? Were they doing anything different to their peers? What do you feel was important factors, I guess, to build robustness and athletes that can not only perform a really high level on a weekly basis, but do it over longevity, sustainable, long period?
Yeah, I suppose it's the quality of their work in training, their consistency, their desire to always improve. It was quite interesting that, after a training session, you'd look out onto the field to see who were the players that were doing extra work, and it was always Smith, Cronk, Slater, that were leading the way in doing extras, so they were never satisfied with how they were travelling. They were always looking to improve and work on the finer details, and their execution and everything they did was top notch. And they set a great example to the rest of the squad, the rest of the team, to how preparation should be done.
And what about the evolution of strength and conditioning? What were some more common practices early days when you were starting out? And then how did it sort of evolve over the last sort of 15, 20 years? What have been the biggest changes that you've noticed?
I suppose the biggest change has just been the accountability and the access to data and information that we now have. We've got GPS data. We've got data from the gym in terms of measuring bar speed and that sort of stuff. So in the early days, back in 2003, when I first started at Melbourne, we didn't have GPS units, and that was just something that was starting to come in. So just the accountability and the access to data and information on your players has really gone through the roof. And I think in some ways, some people get caught up too much with the numbers side of it, even in with today's technology. So there's still got to be room for that gut feel and that coaching, that art of coaching. And I think that's what the early strength conditioning coaches had, is that feel for where their players are at, because they didn't have that information available to them that's available now.
Yeah, if you got to unpack that a bit more, how would you go with your gut feel? Is that, I imagine, conversations with obviously coaching staff, but also and clearly the players. But what would you tend to make adjustments with? Was it the football program collectively would just first sort of more change their conditioning side of things, or gym, or would that just depend on what the group's focusing on, and whether you're trying to stretch the players, or whether like you talked about with the representative footy, the main aim was to try and make sure they're available on the weekend, where club you're probably taking a bit more risk and trying to challenge them to develop. But yeah, talk us about the gut. What sort of adjustments would you make in those periods? Was it to train harder, or take a bit out of training?
Yeah, I suppose it's very, very different depending on what stage of the season you're at. Like during the preseason, there's no doubt that you just work really hard and smart, but there are times where your players are overreaching, but that the hard work still needed to continue. Whereas in season, if the boys have just had a really tough game, your following week will just probably focus mostly on the recovery and making sure they're set, ready to play the next game. So your philosophy is very different, I think, from a pre-season to what it is in season. And there are times in season where you know that your players are probably well rested and recovered and can do a bit more work. But the majority of the time, it's about ensuring that the players can recuperate in time for the next game.
And you talked about staff and being aware of having that winning formula, even if you're not winning, or bringing that to the environment. What are some of the things that staff can do to help facilitate that from an energy perspective, whether it be things you might be doing in warm up, or what have been some other things that you might do to when you notice the environment might be a bit flat and needs a bit of a boost?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose sometimes changing the environment can be, what they need, changing the stimulus, changing the gym session around, a change of scenery can make all the difference. Trying to make training more fun. We know that they're all competitive beast players, so by introducing, fun games and skills games into the training session is a way of incorporating a bit more fun. So, there's different ways, different stimuluses that can be used to stimulate your players. during those tough training weeks when the season seems to be a long grind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what about your stance on testing? Is that something you would do in season to, I guess, monitor how the squad's going with their strength and power, or is it something that you more look at their training numbers and go with a gut feel and look at the intensity they're training at and don't test in season?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, testing is important, but you can't test every week, and your testing becomes quite infrequent in season, I suppose. And it's where just your weekly training numbers, you look at those as a bit of a guide as to where your players are at. Because if you're waiting for your next testing period, that could be weeks away. So you may not be getting the information that you need straight away if you just rely on testing numbers. But if you're looking at training numbers week to week, I think that's a better way of finding out where your athletes are at.
And red flags, like would you have benchmarks with developing players that the coaches identified needs to get stronger or bigger or faster? Was there certain benchmarks you had for positions, or how did you go about your athlete development for those that might be a year or two, or maybe a few months away, physically being ready for top level and they were playing reserve grade? How would you treat that sort of cohort differently to the main group?
Yeah, probably your younger players and your fringe players, because they're not playing NRL, you can probably afford to train them a bit harder at times if you need to, just trying to get their numbers up. Because if you can't get their numbers up, well, they're probably not going to become NRL players. So they're still developing pretty much in season as much as possible, in the hope that they'll become NRL players eventually.
Mm-hmm. And biggest challenges in preseason that you find as a high performance manager, perhaps as also for strength and conditioning coaches looking to manage their first program, and they're listening to this in sort of September, October, and they're doing a bit of a planning stage for their first preseason. What are some of the big challenges when going to a new club in a leadership position?
The biggest challenge, I suppose, is just trying to get all the individuals up to speed and making sure that your planning and your programming is, well organised. Your training sessions run to the level that they need to, and working individually with players who might be down in certain areas of their preparation, their physical preparedness. So, individually, one player might have levels in the gym that they need to improve in. Other players may need to improve their aerobic or anaerobic fitness. So again, it's trying to be a little bit individual in their preparation during the pre-season and bringing each individual player up to speed in the respective areas that they need to be.
Yeah, yeah. And with the building the relationship with the coaching team when you're going into a new club, what were some of your maybe strategies or focus areas, I guess, to accelerate that sort of connection between performance and the coaching department?
Yeah, I suppose because I came from a coaching background, I have a bit of an affinity and understanding of the game and what coaches are going through. So I think it's having a healthy respect for the pressures and the requirements of the coach in pre-season and in season, and understanding of that and working together with them. I had a bit of a philosophy that pre-season was mainly the prerogative of the strength conditioning staff to tailor training to meet the needs of the group, and in season, obviously, most of the emphasis is on performance on field. So that's where your coaching, rugby league coaching, sort of takes precedence over your strength conditioning. So it's just being aware of the different stages of your season or pre-season and what the philosophy and what the requirements are during that particular period.
Mm-hmm. And before we start to wrap it up, is there any topics or areas that you find clubs or coaches bring up when you're in a consultancy sort of position that are a bit of a trend, whether it be problems they're trying to solve or just general areas they're trying to upskill themselves? Is there some commonalities between those questions?
There's an area that most strength and conditioning coaches are concerned with is the work they do in the gym and translating that to what happens on the field. And that's where, measuring bar speed and all these sorts of things that are available to us now have a big influence on what happens in the gym, and hopefully the carry over into what happens on the training field and in turn games. So, yeah, that's probably the main area.
Transfer. Yeah. And what about from a personal note, mate? Any pet peeves or any that sort of fires you up from an industry perspective that you'd like to change?
I suppose you talk about salaries and what staff are earning. There seems to be a perception that when up and comers are coming in, that they should be working free of charge or voluntarily, which is probably fair enough. But you're still probably a little bit underpaid in some areas in rugby league compared to what's happening in other sports like AFL. So that's probably a little bit of I suppose, a pet peeve that I have is that, perhaps some staff working in rugby league aren't getting compensated for what they should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what about a favourite way to spend a day off?
Generally by the water, fishing or on the beach.
Yeah, nice.
Somewhere
outdoors.
Sorry?
Somewhere outdoors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love being outdoors close to the water.
And do you have a strong opinion or a belief that you hold that goes against sort of mainstream thinking or sort of a popular consensus?
Not really. I think no, I don't really have an answer to that. Anything going against the consensus, but I suppose one thing is that I was well known for working players to a pretty high level, and I think I suppose my pet peeve is the fact that a lot of the data that looks at is telling players or athletes that they should be doing less, not more.
Mm.
A lot of the wellness data, we red flag players. They can't do that. They need to be modified in this area and that area, but not too often are we told when players can actually work harder or faster or stronger in the gym.
Mm.
So
it's the sports science sort of reducing things rather than enhancing.
Yeah, a lot of the sports science data that we have is taking a conservative approach, whereas I'd like some of the data to come out to actually say, well, your players are in great condition at the moment. They can work really hard. There's an opportunity in the next couple of weeks to put a lot more work in to hopefully get some better physical qualities.
Yeah. And talk to us a little bit more about your current consultancy sort of experience that you're doing at the moment. What's on the horizon, mate? What are you most excited about for the rest of the year? Obviously, recording this in the middle of the year, middle of June 2025. Yeah. What's on the horizon for the rest of the year?
Yeah, it's just continuing on with my consultancy work with a couple of young strength conditioning coaches that are looking to break into the industry. And in fact, my son is probably one of those. He's working at the Brisbane Bullets as a strength conditioning coach there. So just mentoring him and helping him with some of the issues that he has from day to day. So that's sort of what I have on the horizon for the rest of the year, is just to continue to mentor these young strength conditioning coaches that I'm working with.
Fantastic. That's awesome, mate. And sounds really rewarding. And I really appreciate you jumping on, Alex, sharing with us your journey in high performance sport to date, and of course sharing some wisdom and tips for future generation coaches. For anyone listening in that wants to take you up on some mentoring services, or perhaps connect and follow up with a question, where's the best place to get in contact?
Probably on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Yeah.
For those listening to the recording, you might be driving. Don't sweat. I'll add Alex's LinkedIn link in the show notes. So when you're next free, you can click that and connect there and get in contact. And thank you for everyone that's tuned in live as well. Our next live chat will be with Tom Thompson, which will be the 17th of July, so just under a month away, at 8:30 p.m. Australian Standard Time. So I look forward to seeing you guys then. Thanks again, Alex.
Thanks, Jack.